I never gave birth to this thing. Look at her, everybody. She's my absolute disgrace. A coward who ditched her own unit just to run from enemy fire. My mother's voice screeched through the microphone, sharp as shrapnel tearing through the smooth jazz at the Florida Country Club. The VIP guests stopped chewing. Hands flew up to cover gasps and muffled laughs. Claire stared at the floor, faking embarrassment. Ryan Hale, her Navy SEAL fiancé, furrowed his brow. He stepped toward me with the pitying smirk of a superior reaching out a hand to comfort the coward. I didn't blink. When I extended my arm, the cuff of my Marine Corps dress blues hitched up just a fraction. The jagged star-shaped burn scar and the Navy cross ribbon locked dead center into Ryan's retinas. The SEAL's smirk froze. His entire body jerked like he'd grabbed a live wire. He snapped his heels together with a hard crack, throwing a rigid salute to his brow. "Ma'am, are you the ghost?" But before I tell you exactly how that massive shift in power crushed my family's arrogance, hit like and subscribe. Because the real punishment was just getting started, and none of them were ready for the fallout. Recycled ozone, stale sweat. The San Diego Command Center smelled like a steel cage. A dozen tactical monitors threw a harsh, icy blue glare across the bulkheads. Center screen a live UAV drone feed, circling a godforsaken stretch of desert. I gripped the radio receiver. The black plastic was warm slick from a 12-hour shift. Through the static, the heavy rhythmic thumping of Apache chopper blades vibrated straight into my jawbone. Viper 2. You are clear to disengage. Move to extraction point Bravo. Copy that command. On the edge of my metal desk, my personal iPhone started vibrating. It rattled violently against the steel. A harsh, irritating buzzing that cut right through the calculated silence of the war room. I didn't take my eyes off the drone feed. I let it ring. It stopped. Then it vibrated again. A voicemail notification. I hit the speaker icon with a calloused thumb. I kept the volume low. My mother's voice spilled out, dripping with that fake, syrupy Florida Country Club drawl. The kind of voice that ordered dirty martinis and treated the waitstaff like stray dogs. "Paige, Claire's engagement party is this weekend. You better actually show up. And listen to me, Ryan is a Navy SEAL. A real soldier. Dressed like a normal woman for once. I swear if you bring that miserable desk jockey attitude and ruin our family photos, I'll never forgive you." Click. I lowered the radio. My chest rose and fell in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Exactly 60 beats per minute. A sniper's heartbeat. Around me, 24 combat officers held their collective breath. They were waiting on my word. Waiting for a one-star general to authorize a hellfire strike that could wipe a grid square completely off the map. I held the lives of 200 Marines in the palm of my hand. But to the woman on that voicemail, I was just a stain on her suburban canvas. I picked up the phone. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. A family group chat, 17 messages in the last 3 minutes alone. "Mom, should we do the Chardonnay or the Pinot for the toast? Aunt Susan, the Pinot. Ryan loves red. Claire, make sure the caterers don't use those cheap paper napkins." Scroll, scroll. Not a single message asking if I was safe. Not one asking if a general in the United States Marine Corps could even get military leave to fly across the country. Just an endless stream of superficial garbage. Then a private text popped up. "Claire, listen when you get here, just stand in the back. Don't try to make everything about you like you always do." My jaw locked. The muscles in my neck pulled tight, feeling like coiled steel. "Make it about me." I reached down and yanked open the heavy drawer of my desk. The metal rollers groaned. Inside, sitting right next to a spare magazine for my 9mm sidearm, was a bank passbook. I flipped it open. The black ink on the final line stared up at me, mocking my stupidity. A withdrawal. $12,000. Cleared just last month. That was hazard pay. Blood money. Cash I scraped together during a deployment where I ate cold MREs in a dirt trench while mortars rained down on us. I wired every single dime of it to Florida to bail out Claire's bankrupt nail salon so she wouldn't lose her leased BMW. I saved her from total financial ruin. And my repayment, I was ordered to stand in a corner like a disobedient dog just so I wouldn't embarrass her in front of a guy who hadn't even bought the ring yet. I stared at the glowing screen of the phone. A bitter metallic taste flooded the back of my throat. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt a cold, dead rage settling deep into my bones. The exact kind of clarity you only get right before you pull a trigger. They didn't just want my money. They wanted me invisible. They wanted me to be the pathetic, paper-pushing older sister so Claire could play the glamorous military wife. I tossed the iPhone into the drawer. It hit the steel bottom with a dull smack. I slammed it shut. I grabbed a pen and signed my name at the bottom of the fire support authorization report. A sharp, jagged scrawl. I shoved the clipboard into the chest of the young lieutenant standing beside me. "Execute," I said. My voice was dead flat. "Yes, ma'am." I turned on my heel. My combat boots hit the concrete floor with a heavy thud. I walked past the glowing monitors, past the hushed whispers of the tactical team, straight into my private quarters. The room was pitch black. It smelled like boot polish and burnt coffee. I stopped in front of the tall metal locker. I wasn't canceling my flight. I wasn't going to stay away and let them rewrite my reality. If they wanted to play games with a Marine, I'd bring the front line right to their front door. I reached up. I grabbed the heavy metal zipper of the black garment bag hanging in the dark. My knuckles went white. I yanked it down. The immaculate dark fabric of my Marine Corps dress blues caught the hallway light. The polished brass buttons, the blood-red piping. I wasn't going to a wedding. I was dropping into enemy territory. The harsh rip of the garment bag zipper faded into the dead silence of my quarters. I left the dress blues hanging. I needed to finish clearing out my desk. My deployment orders required a clean house. That meant sorting through 3 years of IRS tax files shoved into a dented steel filing cabinet. I pulled out a heavy manila folder. It slipped. Papers spilled across the concrete floor. I knelt down. The floor was freezing through the fabric of my fatigue pants. I started gathering the loose sheets. That is when my fingers brushed against it. A small faded slip of thermal bank paper. It felt like sandpaper against my calloused thumb. I held it up to the harsh yellow glare of the desk lamp. Amount $15,000. Destination primary checking Florida. Memo line Fallujah hazard pay. I stared at the black ink. The numbers did not blur. I did not cry. My chest just tightened a heavy suffocating pressure like a combat boot pressing down on my ribs. 2 years ago. A Tuesday afternoon. My phone buzzed with a FaceTime call from my mother. I was sitting on a metal cot in a transit barracks smelling like diesel fuel and stale sweat. I answered it. My mother filled the screen. She was standing in her newly renovated kitchen in Florida. The sunlight bounced off a massive, flawless slab of Italian marble. "Look at this page," she said. Her voice was not meant for me. It was projected, aimed straight at the open window so her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, could hear every word. Claire did so well with her salon this quarter. She bought this for me. Can you believe it? Such a sharp business mind. Not everyone is cut out to just push paper at a government desk. I sat on that metal cot. I looked at the pristine white marble. I looked at my own fingernails permanently stained with gun oil and dessert dirt. I did not say a single word. I let her lie. I let her build a monument to her golden child on a foundation of my blood. I ran my thumb over the edge of the bank receipt. The memory shifted. The reality of that kitchen counter was a lot uglier than Italian marble. A month before that FaceTime call, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was not a casual check-in. It was a hostage negotiation. My mother was frantic. Her voice was a sharp, hissing whisper. "Paige, you need to wire money. Right now." Claire had maxed out 4 different credit cards, Prada bags, a leased BMW she could not afford, Botox appointments. The debt collectors were calling the house. The repo man was circling the driveway. And Claire's solution. She locked herself in a bathroom and threatened to swallow a handful of Ambien if our mother did not fix it. "She is fragile, Paige." My mother had hissed through the receiver. "You are out there doing nothing. You have money sitting in the bank. Do not be selfish. Fix this. Do not embarrass this family." Emotional blackmail. a gun to my head loaded with my sister's manufactured fragility, so I transferred the money. $15,000. They thought it was easy money, just a government paycheck for sitting behind a desk. They had no idea what hazard pay actually meant. They did not know about the trench outside Fallujah. They did not know about the mortar shell that hit our convoy. I earned that $15,000 by dragging a 19-year-old kid out of a burning Humvee. I earned it by kneeling in the boiling sand, my hands slick with his blood, holding a tourniquet so tight my own muscles tore. The air smelled like burning rubber and roasted meat. A stray AK-47 round ripped through the sleeve of my uniform, slicing a jagged trench across my forearm. I did not let go of the tourniquet. The kid lived. My reward was a star-shaped scar and hazard pay, and my mother took that blood money, bought a marble countertop, and told the country club that Claire earned it. I stood up from the concrete floor. The coldness in my chest hardened into solid ice. I did not feel betrayed anymore. Betrayal implies you still expected them to be loyal. I just felt a deep clinical disgust. I walked over to the corner of the room. A heavy-duty paper shredder sat next to the trash can. I reached down and hit the power switch. The machine hummed to life. A single red LED light cut through the shadows. I held the faded bank receipt over the metal slot. This was not just a piece of paper, it was a chain. It was proof of every time I let them use my guilt and my duty to finance their lies. I let it drop. The steel blades caught the paper. A loud, violent crunching sound echoed off the cinder block walls. The machine ground the $15,000 lie into hundreds of meaningless, shredded strips. The contract was null and void. I turned to my closet. Lying on the top shelf was a cheap lavender sweater. My mother sent it for Christmas last year, bought on clearance 3 sizes too small. Another calculated insult wrapped in wrapping paper. I grabbed it. I tossed it straight into the garbage can. If you have ever been the family ATM, the one who fixes everyone's messes but gets absolutely zero respect for it, hit that like button right now and comment, "I am done." Let me know I am not fighting this war alone. I turned off the desk lamp. The room went black. Tomorrow I was flying to Florida. Not to attend a party, not to play the invisible sister. Tomorrow I was going to close the ledger on the worst debt of my life. The fluorescent light overhead hummed, a cheap flickering bulb in a concrete box. I stood in front of the small mirror, unbuttoning the cuff of my crisp white uniform shirt. I rolled the fabric up to my elbow. The harsh light hit my right wrist. There it was, a jagged star-shaped crater of raised, discolored tissue. It cut a harsh line straight across the radial artery. The skin around it was permanently burned tight. It looked like a branding mark. The Reaper had missed taking my hand by a fraction of an inch. I stared at the scar, and the cold walls of the barracks dissolved. The air turned into a furnace. 115 degrees in the Iraqi dirt. The smell of burning rubber cordite and copper flooded my throat. Fallujah. A mortar shell hit 50 yards away. The shockwave punched all the air out of my lungs. Dirt and gravel rained down on the Kevlar helmets. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the screaming. It was a kid, 19 years old, a private from Ohio. He was lying in the open sand, clutching a shredded mess of bone and uniform where his right leg used to be. The sand beneath him was turning black. I did not think. I just moved. I broke cover and sprinted across the open ground. Bullets kicked up geysers of dirt around my boots. The air snapped and hissed. I dropped to my knees beside him. My hands were already slick with his blood. I grabbed the heavy nylon strap of a combat tourniquet. I wrapped it high above the ragged stump. I grabbed the windlass rod. I pulled hard. Then the AK-47 round found me. It was a supersonic crack right past my ear. The bullet grazed my right wrist. It tore through the sleeve, ripped the flesh open, and burned the nerve endings. A blinding, white-hot flash of agony shot up to my shoulder. My grip faltered for half a second. The kid let out a wet, rattling gasp. I closed my eyes. I locked my jaw. I wrapped my bleeding hand back around the plastic rod and twisted it again. I held the tension. The blood stopped pumping. I held him down in the dirt until the medevac arrived. He lived. I got a bandage and a one-way ticket to surgery. The memory shifted. The Iraqi sun vanished, replaced by the soft, warm glow of a crystal chandelier. Thanksgiving dinner. 8 months ago. My mother sat at the head of a long mahogany table in Florida. The air smelled of roasted turkey, expensive red wine, and heavy cinnamon candles. Silverware clinked against fine china. Uncle Richard sat across from me. He pointed a fork at my forearm. I had rolled up my sleeves to help carry the heavy serving plates. "That is a nasty scar you have there, Paige," he said, chewing a piece of bread. "Car accident." Before I could open my mouth, my mother laughed. A high grating sound that demanded everyone's attention. She waved her hand dismissively, her gold bracelets clanking together. "Oh, please, do not encourage her," my mother said. She took a sip of her wine. She tripped over a folding chair during a fire alarm at the office. You know how these desk workers are, always panicking. She was probably the first one out the door. A few relatives chuckled. Claire rolled her eyes and went back to checking her phone. I sat there. I looked down at my plate. I picked up my silver fork. I cut a piece of dry, overcooked white meat. I put it in my mouth. I chewed it. It tasted like ash. I swallowed it down, forcing the lump of absolute rage to stay buried in my stomach. I did not explain. I did not yell. I did not tell them about the smell of blood in the desert or the sound of a dying kid. You do not explain the price of war to people who use your paycheck to buy designer handbags. You do not show battle damage to civilians who choose to be deaf. I pulled myself back to the present. The cold barracks room settled around me once again. I rolled the white sleeve back down. I buttoned the cuff. I reached for the heavy midnight blue wool of the Marine Corps dress blues coat. I slid my left arm in, then my right. The fabric was rigid, heavy. It forced my spine into a perfectly straight line. I started fastening the buttons. They were cold brass stamped with the eagle globe and anchor. One by one, I pushed them through the stiff buttonholes, starting from the waist, moving up to the chest, finally the high, choking collar. The scar disappeared. The truth was locked away beneath a layer of military perfection. They wanted a coward. They wanted an invisible, pathetic sister they could look down on. Fine, I would walk into their country club exactly as they demanded. But I would do it wearing the uniform they despised. I would let the brass and the ribbons do the talking. I brushed a microscopic speck of dust off my shoulder. I squared my stance. Then the silence broke. The heavy brass handle on my door turned with a loud click. The thick wooden door swung open. A shadow fell across the concrete floor. The sharp, authoritative crack of leather dress shoes echoed in the small room. Someone stepped inside. The heavy brass handle on my door clicked. The thick wooden door swung open, dragging across the uneven concrete floor. Lieutenant General Thomas Vance stepped into the harsh, fluorescent light. He was 62 years old, built like a cinder block wall, and had eyes like a hawk that had spent too many years scanning the desert horizon. 3 silver stars gleamed on the collar of his uniform. He brought a sudden shift in the air pressure, along with the faint, sharp smell of pine aftershave and stale black coffee. Vance did not knock. He did not need to. He walked over to the small steel desk. Smack! He dropped a thick manila fire support folder onto the metal surface. He turned slowly. His eyes swept over me. He took in the polished combat boots, the razor-sharp creases of the dark trousers, and the heavy midnight blue wool of the dress blues coat. He looked at my hands, currently buttoning the high collar. "You look like you are prepping to step on an IED, Brigadier General," Vance said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "Not packing for a family cake cutting." I stopped. I brought my hands down. I snapped my heels together with a sharp crack and moved fluidly into parade rest. Feet shoulder-width apart. Hands clasped behind my back. Spine completely rigid. "General," I said, keeping my voice dead flat. "Sometimes enemy fire is far less lethal than family." Vance crossed his massive arms. He did not smile. He knew my file. He knew my psychological evaluations. He was the closest thing to a real father I'd ever had. My biological father was a retired E7 first sergeant who chose to sit in the corner and drink whiskey while my mother tore me apart. Vance was the man who actually stood in the breach with me. "Sit rep, Paige," He ordered. I gave him the situation report. Cold, objective, stripped of all emotion. My sister is getting engaged this weekend, Florida Country Club. The fiancé is a Navy SEAL. My mother left a voicemail explicitly ordering me to stand in the back. She wants me to hide the fact that I push paper for a living. She does not want my cowardice to embarrass her in front of a real soldier. Silence stretched in the small concrete room. The overhead light flickered. Vance stared at me. The muscles in his jaw flexed. He did not offer pity. Pity was for the weak. He uncrossed his arms and closed the distance between us in 2 heavy strides. He stopped right in front of me. He raised a thick scarred index finger and tapped it hard against the left side of my chest. Clink. His fingernail hit the solid metal of the Navy Cross ribbon pinned over my heart. "They do not know who you are," Vance said. The gravel in his voice hardened into crushed rock. "They see a desk. They see paperwork. They do not know you are the officer who authorized the danger-close airstrike on the Syrian border last November. You dropped Hellfire 30 yards from friendly positions and pulled 3 pinned-down SEAL teams out of a meat grinder." He tapped the metal again, harder this time. "Those boys got to go home in transport planes instead of body bags because of you. Because you did not hesitate." Vance leaned in slightly, his hawk eyes boring straight into my skull. "So tell me, Paige, how much longer are you going to let civilians wipe their dirty shoes on this ribbon?" I looked at the older man. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest for the past 48 hours suddenly evaporated. This was my oxygen. This was my reality. Blood is just an accident of birth. It means nothing. It gives people the right to demand your money and your silence, but it does not buy loyalty. Loyalty is earned in the dirt. It is forged under fire. The man standing in front of me and the uniform I wore, that was my actual family. They knew the price of my scars. I took a slow, deep breath. The rigid discipline of the Marine Corps settled deep into my bones, freezing out the last remaining drops of toxic guilt my mother had planted there. I looked Vance dead in the eye. My gaze did not waver. People who lack the necessary clearance do not get the after-action report. "Sir," I said. My voice rang out sharp and heavy as a brass casing hitting the floor. "Incompetent personnel will be treated as hostile variables, nothing more." Vance held my stare for a long second. Then the corner of his mouth twitched upward into a grim, knowing smile. He stepped back. He snapped his right hand to his brow in a razor-sharp salute. He did not do it because protocol demanded it. He did it because he respected the soldier standing in front of him. I brought my hand up. I returned the salute. Perfect, unshakable. "Dismissed, General," Vance said softly. "Give them hell." I dropped my hand. I turned around and grabbed the black garment bag off the metal rack. I grabbed my heavy duffel. I did not look back at the desk. I did not look back at the shredded bank receipt in the trash can. I walked out of the concrete room and pushed through the heavy double doors of the command center. The cool San Diego night air hit my face. The smell of salt water and jet fuel. A black Uber idled at the curb, its headlights cutting through the coastal fog. The driver popped the trunk. I threw my bags inside. The heavy thud shook the rear bumper. I opened the back door and slid onto the cheap leather seat. "Airport?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Yeah," I said, staring out the window at the dark highway. "Take me to the minefield." The black Uber pulled up to the valet stand. I pushed the door open. It shut behind me with a hollow metal thud. The Florida Country Club was a massive, sprawling structure of white stucco and fake Mediterranean columns. A heavy wave of humidity hit my face, but it was nothing compared to the blast of over-engineered freezing air conditioning that hit me when I walked through the double glass doors. The main ballroom was loud. A 4-piece jazz band was playing something smooth and forgettable in the corner. Hundreds of crystal prisms on the chandeliers threw sharp, blinding light across the room. I stepped onto the polished marble floor. My combat boots made a dull, heavy sound. The crowd near the entrance parted instantly. It was not out of respect. It was out of confusion and pure, unfiltered judgment. Men in expensive tuxedos and women in shimmering evening gowns stopped talking. They looked at me like I was a biological threat that had just breached containment. Their eyes raked over the midnight blue wool of my uniform. They stared at the high collar, the white belt, the polished brass. Then they looked at my face. I did not drop my gaze. I did not smile. Not a single person from my family stepped forward to greet me. I stopped just inside the doorway. I stood at attention, perfectly still, and scanned the room, just like a sniper mapping out a hostile grid. Target 1. The center of the room. My mother. She was wearing a silver dress that probably cost more than a private's monthly salary. She was laughing too loud, holding a crystal flute of champagne and running her manicured hand over the lapel of Ryan Hale's tuxedo jacket. She was playing the role of the adoring mother-in-law to perfection. Target 2. The far left corner. My father. He was sitting alone at a small cocktail table in the shadows. He wore a cheap rented suit that did not fit his broad shoulders. He was staring down into a glass of amber whiskey. When he saw me walk in, his shoulders slumped. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He knew exactly what was coming, and he was already surrendering. Then the perimeter was breached. Claire came storming across the marble floor. Her face was flushed underneath a heavy layer of professional makeup. She wore a white silk designer dress that clung to her like a second skin. The dress I paid for. She stopped 2 feet away from me. She smelled like Chanel No. 5, too much of it. It was thick, sweet, and suffocating. "Are you insane?" Claire hissed. She kept her voice low, but her teeth were clenched. "What the hell are you wearing?" I looked down at her. The uniform I was authorized to wear. Claire's eyes darted frantically around the room, checking to see who was watching. "You look like a freak, Paige. Look at Ryan. He's a real soldier, and he's wearing a tuxedo like a normal human being. Why are you wearing this cheap costume? Cheap costume." The words hung in the freezing air. "You did this on purpose," Claire said, her voice rising just enough to carry to the nearest tables. "You just could not stand the fact that today is about me. You had to wear this garbage just to steal the spotlight. You are so pathetic." It was a masterclass in delusion. The woman whose debts I had just paid, the woman whose very lifestyle was subsidized by my blood, was standing in a $500 pair of heels, calling the uniform of the United States Marine Corps a cheap costume. She reached out and grabbed the sleeve of my dress blues, trying to pull me toward a side door. "Go to the bathroom and take this jacket off. Now." My reaction was pure muscle memory. I stepped back and chopped my left arm down, breaking her grip instantly. I did not hit her, but the force of the block made her stumble back a step. "Do not touch this uniform," I said. My voice was a dead flat calm. "It is not a theater prop, Claire, and I am not one of your salon employees." Claire's mouth dropped open. She looked at her hand, then up at me, her eyes filling with manufactured defensive tears. Across the room, the disturbance caught the radar. My mother stopped laughing. She looked through the crowd and locked eyes with me. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look angry. Her lips curled up into a slow, deliberate smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered its prey. I had given her exactly what she wanted. I had shown up looking different, standing out, refusing to conform to the picture-perfect aesthetic she demanded. She had her excuse. My mother turned to the photographer setting up a group shot nearby. She snapped her fingers twice, pointing down at the floor to stop him. Then she reached out and grabbed Ryan Hale by the elbow. She whispered something in his ear. The Navy SEAL nodded, a smug, arrogant grin spreading across his face. My mother let go of his arm. She turned and began walking straight toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom. She tapped the side of a tall microphone stand. A high-pitched squeal of feedback ripped through the speakers. The jazz band stopped mid-note. The entire room went dead silent. The high-pitched squeal of the microphone sliced through the country club ballroom. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing. Conversations died mid-sentence. Clink, clink, clink. My mother tapped a silver salad fork against her crystal champagne flute. She stood at the center of the small elevated stage. The heavy warm light from the overhead spotlight washed over her expensive silver dress. She held the microphone close to her mouth, ensuring every single syllable would echo off the marble walls. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," she said. Her voice was smooth-coated in that fake, sugary Southern hospitality. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Claire and Ryan. A polite murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Now, before we raise a glass, I want to introduce someone who just arrived. She paused. The silence in the room suddenly felt heavy, oppressive. She raised her left hand. Her index finger, painted with bright red polish, pointed straight across the ballroom, straight at me. I want to introduce my absolute disappointment of a daughter. The crowd went dead quiet. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit working overtime. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I stood perfectly still, my boots planted firmly on the floor. Look at her, everyone. My mother continued, her voice taking on a sharp, vicious edge. A paper pusher. A clerk who likes to play dress-up in a cheap uniform. She wants you all to think she is some kind of hero. She let out a dry, mocking laugh. But I know the truth. The truth is, she is a coward. A coward who tripped over her own 2 feet and ditched her own unit just to run away from enemy fire. A wave of low, muffled laughter rolled through the crowd. Men in tuxedos nudged each other. Women covered their mouths with manicured hands, their eyes wide with entertained disgust. They were laughing. The civilians were laughing at blood they had never seen and dirt they had never tasted. I did not step back. I kept my hands clasped tightly behind my back. The leather of my gloves stretched. My knuckles went dead white under the strain. I focused on my breathing. In. Out. I did not scream. I did not storm the stage. The silence I projected was not fear. It was a steel coil being compressed to its absolute breaking point, a pressure cooker with the safety valve welded shut. My mother soaked up the laughter. She was glowing. She had an audience, and she was feeding them the exact narrative she needed to secure her own status. She turned slightly, gesturing to the man standing next to her. But, she said, her voice softening into a tone of deep, manufactured reverence, we are so blessed. Because Claire managed to find a real man, a real soldier. She smiled warmly at him. Captain Ryan Hale, a Navy SEAL. A man who would never trip over his own feet and run away when things get tough. A man who actually understands duty and honor, unlike some people in this family. The ballroom erupted into applause. Ryan Hale puffed out his chest. He stood tall in his tailored tuxedo, soaking in the admiration. He gave a modest, practiced nod to the crowd. He reached out and wrapped an arm around Claire's waist, pulling her close. She rested her head on his shoulder, the perfect picture of a fragile woman protected by a strong warrior. I stood in the back of the room. The blood pounding in my neck was ice cold. That was it. That was the final drop. The invisible thread connecting me to the woman on that stage snapped. It did not tear slowly. It just broke clean and final. The biological obligation, the toxic guilt, the desperate lingering hope that she might one day act like a mother, all of it turned to ash. I looked at her and I felt absolutely nothing. She was no longer family. She was just a hostile target sitting in the crosshairs. The applause died down. The jazz band started playing a low, upbeat tune to transition the crowd toward the bar. On the stage, Ryan Hale leaned down and whispered something to my mother. She smiled and patted his cheek. Then he let go of Claire's waist and stepped down from the small platform. He started walking across the marble floor, straight toward me. The crowd parted for him again, this time with respectful nods and admiring glances. He walked with the heavy, arrogant stride of a man who believed he owned the room. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. He looked down at me. His eyes swept over the brass buttons of my dress blues, his mouth twisting into a smirk of pure, condescending pity. He was playing the benevolent superior, the gracious war hero coming to offer a crumb of comfort to the disgraced coward. I stood my ground. My hands remained clasped behind my back. If you have ever had a family member try to humiliate you in public just to make themselves look better, hit the like button. Drop the word "done" in the comments right now, because that is exactly what I was. Ryan Hale adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo jacket. He tilted his head, giving me a look that was supposed to be sympathetic, but was entirely venomous. Do not let her get to you, he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. I did not say a word. I just waited. The trap was set. Ryan Hale closed the distance between us with the slow, measured stride of a man who firmly believed he was the apex predator in the room. The crowd of wealthy Floridians parted for him, offering small respectful nods as he passed. He soaked it up. He thrived on it. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me, close enough to establish dominance, far enough to maintain a clear line of sight. The heavy, suffocating scent of his expensive woodsy cologne rolled off him, battling with the stale, over-conditioned air of the country club. It was a designer scent, the kind of cologne worn by men who spent more time drinking at upscale hotel bars than sleeping in the dirt. He reached up with one hand and casually adjusted the lapel of his perfectly tailored midnight black tuxedo. A small, incredibly patronizing smile pulled at the corners of his mouth. He looked at me the way a wealthy man looks at a beggar on the street. It was a look dripping with unearned pity. "Do not let her get to you," Ryan said. His voice was pitched low-coded in that smooth, arrogant confidence of a guy who thought he held every single card in the deck. "Your mother means well. She just has very high standards for this family." I did not blink. I did not speak. I let the silence hang there between us, heavy and thick as a wool blanket. In the military, silence is a weapon. It forces the weaker mind to fill the void. Ryan took the bait instantly. He took my silence as submission. He thought he had broken me. He thought he was talking to a defeated paper-pushing clerk who was too intimidated by his Navy SEAL trident to form a sentence. "Look, the military is not for everybody," he continued, slipping effortlessly into the tone of a gracious mentor counseling a failed recruit. "Not everyone is cut out for the front line. It takes a certain kind of wiring. Doing paperwork, filing reports, pushing pencils at a desk somewhere. It is still a way to serve. Someone has to keep the lights on back home, right?" He chuckled at his own joke, a dry, hollow sound. I kept my eyes locked on his. Behind the confident smirk, I could read the exact rank structure he had built in his head. In his mind, he was the seasoned combat veteran. I was the pathetic civilian in a costume. Over his left shoulder, about 20 yards away, I could see my mother and Claire standing near the edge of the stage. They had their arms crossed over their chests. My mother was gripping a crystal champagne flute so tightly her knuckles were white. They were watching us like vultures circling a dying animal. They were waiting for the final act. They wanted to see the disgraced, jealous older sister physically bow her head, accept the pity of the real soldier, and slink out the back doors in absolute shame. I shifted my weight. It was a tiny, highly calculated tactical movement. I rotated my right combat boot just a fraction of an inch against the polished marble floor. The heavy rubber sole made a faint squeak. I squared my shoulders, positioning myself perfectly on the grid. The blinding yellow light from the massive crystal chandelier hanging directly above us now hit the right side of my body dead on. Ryan completely misread the shift in my stance. He thought I was preparing to retreat. He clicked his tongue against his teeth, shaking his head slowly with a look of extreme disappointment. "I heard about what happened to you," Ryan said, lowering his voice into a harsh, conspiratorial whisper. "Getting hurt because you tripped over a chair while running away from a fire drill, leaving your co-workers behind." He let out a sharp breath, his smirk hardening into a look of absolute, unfiltered disdain. "I am going to be straight with you, Paige. In the SEAL teams, that kind of cowardice means you get washed out on day one. We do not tolerate people who break under pressure. When the bullets start flying, you either stand your ground or you get people killed. It is probably a good thing you are stuck behind a desk." It was a garbage judgment, a filthy manufactured lie delivered by a man who was eagerly swallowing the poison fed to him by a narcissistic mother. He did not know the truth. He did not know about the burning sand, the smell of roasted meat, or the 19-year-old kid whose life I saved with my bare hands. Ryan raised his right arm and extended his hand toward me. It was a firm, masculine handshake offer, the ultimate final gesture of dominance. He wanted me to take it. He wanted me to reach out and physically accept my place beneath him. He wanted to feel my hand shake in his grip. I looked down at his outstretched hand. I did not reach out to shake it. I did not say a single word in my own defense. Instead, I executed a silent strike. I lifted my right arm in a sharp, mechanical, violently rigid motion. I stopped it exactly halfway up my torso. The sudden, aggressive movement caused the heavy midnight blue wool sleeve of my dress blues coat to hitch up. The fabric pulled back hard against my forearm. The bright, unforgiving light of the chandelier hit my bare wrist. the star-shaped scar was completely exposed. The jagged, burned crater of tissue that had almost cost me my life in Fallujah stood out like a branding iron mark against my pale skin. It was ugly. It was brutal. It was undeniable proof of violent close-quarters combat. But the harsh light did not stop there. It traveled inches up my chest, hitting the perfectly polished metal pinned precisely above my heart. The Navy Cross ribbon, the second highest military decoration for extreme valor in combat awarded by the United States. A medal you do not get for pushing paper. A medal you only get for walking through hell and bringing your people back alive. And right above it, resting heavily on the collar of the uniform they had just called a cheap costume. A single, solid, silver star. The absolute insignia of a brigadier general in the United States Marine Corps. 07. An officer who outranked the Navy SEAL captain standing in front of me by 4 entire pay grades. I held my arm suspended in the air, the brass buttons of my cuff gleaming in the light. The trap had snapped shut. The steel jaws were locked tight. There was absolutely nowhere for him to run. Ryan Hale's outstretched hand hovered in the empty space between us. His eyes full of arrogant pity dropped to my wrist. They locked onto the scar. I watched his micro-expressions. The human face cannot hide genuine shock. I watched his brain process the jagged, discolored tissue. I watched him realize that this was not a burn from a spilled coffee pot. This was a kinetic trauma wound, the ugly, brutal, undeniable signature of close-quarters combat. The corner of his mouth twitched violently. His eyes darted upward, following the sharp crease of the midnight blue wool on my sleeve. They hit the Navy Cross ribbon. His breathing stopped. I could literally see the oxygen leave his lungs. The Navy Cross is not something you buy at a boutique. It is not something you get for pushing paper at a desk. You earn it in the dirt, surrounded by chaos, usually right before you die. Then his line of sight crept up one final inch. It landed dead center on the collar of my coat. The single, solid silver star. 07. Brigadier General. The blood drained out of Ryan Hale's face so fast he looked like a corpse. His deep Florida tan turned the color of wet cement. The smug, patronizing smirk did not just fade away. It shattered into a million pieces. His entire body locked up instantly, recognizing the massive, insurmountable gap in the chain of command. He had just mocked a general officer. He had just offered a condescending handshake to a superior who outranked him by 4 entire pay grades. He yanked his extended hand back as if my uniform was covered in battery acid. He snapped his heels together. The heavy leather of his dress shoes slammed into each other with a violent crack. The sound echoed off the marble floor like a pistol shot. "Ma'am," Ryan stuttered. His voice was completely unrecognizable. The smooth, arrogant tone was gone, replaced by the raw, trembling rasp of a junior officer realizing he had stepped directly onto a landmine. Are you... the ghost?" His right arm whipped up. His hand snapped flat against his brow in the tightest, most rigid salute I had ever seen. He locked his eyes straight ahead, staring at the wall behind me, absolutely terrified to even look at my face. The country club ballroom turned into a vacuum. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The clinking of silverware stopped completely. The jazz band members slowly lowered their brass instruments to their sides. The crowd of wealthy, judgmental civilians stared in absolute confusion at the Navy SEAL, standing frozen in a salute before the woman they had just been laughing at. To my left, my mother's jaw dropped. The cruel, triumphant smile melted off her face. Her hand began to shake uncontrollably. The expensive champagne inside her crystal flute sloshed back and forth, spilling sticky foam onto her silver dress and her designer shoes. She could not compute the visual. Her brain refused to process the reality playing out in front of her. "Ryan!" My mother hissed, her voice shrill and desperate, slicing through the quiet room. "What are you doing? Put your arm down. Stop it. She is just a clerk. She pushes paper. Shut your mouth." The roar did not come from me. It came from the VIP table near the band. 3 massive men in custom tuxedos stood up in perfect unison. They were Ryan's squad mates, active-duty Navy SEALs. One of them, a man with a thick beard and a white scar running through his left eyebrow, kicked his chair backward. The heavy wooden chair hit the marble floor with a loud, violent crash. He pointed a massive calloused finger directly at my mother. He did not care about the country club aesthetic. He did not care about the expensive dresses or the polite society rules. Paperwork. The seal barked, his voice carrying the harsh, jagged edge of a man who had seen too much death. General Clark is the officer who authorized the danger close fire mission on the Syrian border last November. We were pinned down. We were completely out of ammo. He stepped out from behind the table, glaring at the crowd of terrified civilians. If it were not for her, all three of our teams would have come home in body bags. She saved our lives. The words hit the room like a fragmentation grenade. Body bags. The ugly, unfiltered reality of war exploded right in the middle of their pristine, superficial party. The crowd physically recoiled. Women gasped and covered their mouths. Men stared at the floor, suddenly deeply ashamed of their previous laughter. My mother took a step backward, her high heel slipping slightly on the spilled champagne. She looked at the angry seal, then at Ryan, who was still locked in a terrified, trembling salute. Finally, she looked at me. Her entire false empire was burning to the ground. The lie she had spent years building, the narrative she had carefully crafted to make herself look superior, was reduced to ash in front of the most important people in her social circle. She was completely exposed. A fraud. A mother who dragged her war hero daughter through the mud just to stroke her own ego. Claire stood next to her, pale and trembling, her eyes darting frantically around the room, realizing her perfect engagement party was dead on arrival. I stood in the center of the wreckage. I did not smile. I did not feel the need to gloat. True power does not need to yell. It does not need to argue. It just exists. I looked at Captain Ryan Hale. He was sweating. A single bead of perspiration rolled down the side of his face. I slowly raised my right hand. I executed a flawless, perfectly timed salute. I held it for exactly 2 seconds. "At ease, Captain Hale," I said. My voice was calm, cold, and heavy as iron. I dropped my hand. Ryan let out a shaky breath and lowered his arm, though his body remained rigidly at attention. I did not offer my mother a single word of explanation. I did not look at Claire. They were no longer a part of my chain of command. They were not even on my radar. I turned on my heel. The heavy rubber soles of my combat boots gripped the marble. I walked straight toward the double glass doors. The crowd scrambled to get out of my way, parting like the Red Sea, keeping their eyes cast downward in absolute silence. I pushed through the heavy doors. They swung shut behind me with a solid, finalizing thud. I stepped out into the humid Florida night, leaving them all trapped inside the burning building they had built themselves. The heavy glass doors of the country club closed behind me. The thick humidity of the Florida night immediately replaced the freezing air conditioning. I got back to my hotel room an hour later. The space was dark, quiet, and perfectly still. I dropped my garment bag onto the armchair. My iPhone lit up on the nightstand. The screen glared in the dark room. I picked it up. A new text message from Claire. "You ruined everything. You did this on purpose? Could you not just play along for one single day? You destroyed my engagement party." I stared at the glowing letters. There was no apology for the public execution my mother had just attempted. There was no remorse for calling me a coward. They were not sorry for the lie. They were only furious that the mask had been ripped off in front of Ryan's SEAL buddies and the country club elite. I did not type a response. I did not feel the need to argue with a parasite that was angry about being pulled off its host. I sat down at the small desk and flipped open my military-issue laptop. The blue light from the screen cast harsh shadows across the room. I logged into my primary banking portal. My fingers moved across the keyboard. Fast, deliberate. Click. I accessed the joint account settings. Click. I selected the supplementary platinum credit card tied to Claire's name, the one she used to lease her BMW and buy her Prada bags. Click. Deactivate card. Reason lost/stolen. I moved to the autopay settings, the monthly wire transfer that kept her failing nail salon afloat. I highlighted the recurring payment rule. I hit the delete key. The financial cord was cut. The blood supply was severed. I opened my email. I started a new draft addressed to my mother. I kept it as brief as a casualty report. Blood obligation terminated. All financial support has been permanently cut off. Do not contact me again. I have actual soldiers to worry about. I hit send. I picked up my iPhone. I opened the family group chat. I tapped leave conversation. Then I went to my mother's contact profile. I scrolled to the bottom. Block caller. I did the exact same thing for Claire. I set the phone down face down on the desk. The silence in the room was absolute. It did not feel like a victory. It felt like I had just amputated a rotting limb to save the rest of my body. It hurt, but the infection was finally gone. 6 weeks later, San Diego Command Center. I was standing over a digital map table tracking a drone feed over a hostile sector in the Middle East. The room smelled like ozone and black coffee. The secure red phone on the wall behind me buzzed. A harsh electronic tone. I picked up the heavy receiver. General Clark. Page. It was my father. His voice sounded older, thinner. I know you blocked them, but she is using my phone. Just listen to her for a minute, please. Before I could answer, the phone was fumbled. I heard a shaky, ragged breath through the receiver. Paige! It was Claire, but the arrogant, whiny tone of the spoiled country club princess was completely gone. Her voice was cracked, broken. Paige, Ryan deployed 3 weeks ago. A black ops mission. They will not tell me where he is. They will not tell me anything. A heavy, jagged sob tore through the encrypted line. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated terror, the kind of fear that rots a person from the inside out. I have not slept in days. Claire choked out her words, stumbling over each other. Every time a car drives down the street, I think it is 2 men in uniform coming to the door. I do not know if he's alive or dead. I feel like I am going insane. I stood in the war room. I looked at the red dots on the digital map. Hostile targets, friendly units, grid coordinates where men were bleeding in the dirt. Claire was finally experiencing the reality of the uniform she had treated as a cheap costume. She was drowning in the exact same ocean of anxiety that I had been swimming in for 20 years. Is this what it is like? Claire cried, her voice cracking. Is this what you have been doing your whole life, living with this ghost hovering over you, and we never even asked if you were okay. We just asked for your money. Paige. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I listened to her cry. The sound echoed in my ear. I did not feel a sudden wave of sisterly affection. I did not feel the urge to tell her everything was going to be all right. I just felt a cold, objective validation. The karma had come full circle. The universe had stepped in and delivered the exact lesson she needed to learn. I kept my eyes locked on the digital map. My breathing was slow and even. Yes, Claire, I said. My voice was the dry, flat tone of an officer confirming a casualty report. That is exactly what it is like. I paused, letting the silence press down on the line. I acknowledge your apology. But an apology does not rewrite 20 years of history. Take care of yourself. I pulled the receiver away from my ear. I placed it firmly back onto the heavy plastic cradle on the wall. Click. The line went dead. I turned my back on the phone and walked back to the tactical map. The war with my family was officially over. I had won by simply refusing to fight anymore. 3 months later, a heavy, expensive ivory envelope showed up in my metal mailbox. Claire's wedding invitation. I was fully prepared to drop it straight into the kitchen garbage can. Then, my phone rang. It was my father. Come down here, Paige. His gravelly voice scratched through the line. He sounded exhausted, but his tone was firm. Do not hide. Show them you have absolutely nothing to run from. I booked the flight. I walked through the heavy oak doors of the Florida chapel just as the organ started playing a slow traditional march. The air inside was thick, smelling heavily of expensive lilies and burning wax. I wore my dress blues. I did not sneak into the back row like a beaten dog. I walked straight down the center aisle. My combat boots hit the polished hardwood floor with a heavy rhythmic thud. The whispering in the pews died instantly. The crowd physically parted, pulling their tailored suits and silk dresses away from the aisle like I was carrying a live grenade. The stained glass windows threw long fractured shadows across the floor, highlighting the brass buttons on my coat. Up at the altar, Ryan Hale stood in his black tuxedo. He saw me walking toward the front. His spine snapped straight. He did not offer his usual arrogant smirk. He stood at rigid attention, offering a sharp, deeply respectful nod, bowing his head slightly as I passed. The power dynamic in the room was permanently reset. He knew exactly who was in charge. The reception was held out on a stone terrace overlooking a manicured golf course. I stood alone by the stone railing, watching the ice melt in my water glass. A trembling hand touched my elbow. I turned. It was my mother. She looked 10 years older than she had at the engagement party. The heavy, expensive makeup could not hide the deep, dark circles under her eyes. She pulled me away from the crowd toward the empty side of the balcony. She was shaking. Her manicured hands twisted and wrung a white linen napkin into a tight, desperate knot. "Paige!" She choked out, her voice cracking. Real tears spilled over her lower lashes, ruining her mascara. "I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I insulted you. I pushed you down for years because I was terrified of how far you had climbed. I was jealous. I am so sorry." I looked at her. I did not feel a sudden surge of anger. I did not feel pity. I just executed a cold, tactical assessment of the crying woman standing in front of me. "I accept your apology," I said. My voice was dead flat, carrying the cold weight of a steel door swinging shut. "But the version of your daughter that existed just to prop up your fragile ego is dead. If you want to remain in my life, this relationship operates strictly on my rules. You cross the line one time, and you are gone forever." My mother looked at the marble floor. She let out a ragged breath and nodded. Total, unconditional surrender. 6 months later. The blazing California sun beat down on the hot tarmac at the San Diego Naval Base. 200 Marines stood in perfect rigid formation. The air smelled of jet fuel, hot asphalt, and salt water. The American flag snapped violently in the coastal wind overhead. The Pentagon had issued the orders. Major General. Pay grade 08. I stood on the wooden dais, staring straight ahead. My father walked slowly up the wooden steps. He wore his old, faded first sergeant uniform. His massive, calloused hands shook violently as he reached up to my collar. He pushed the metal pin through the heavy blue fabric. Click. A second silver star locked into place next to the first one. A single tear cut a clean line down my father's weathered cheek. He took a heavy step back, squared his shoulders, and threw a razor-sharp salute. "I always knew exactly who you were, General." He whispered, his voice thick with pride. I returned the salute. Down in the front row of the audience, my mother stood clapping. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I am so proud of you, Paige," she mouthed over the noise of the military band. I saw her lips move. I understood the words. But standing there on that stage looking down at her, I realized I felt absolutely nothing. The validation I had spent my entire life bleeding for had finally arrived, and it was completely worthless to me now. My soul had already moved on. The poison was permanently neutralized. Late that afternoon, I drove my truck out to the coastal cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I parked on the dirt shoulder and walked right to the edge of the rocks. The wind whipped my hair across my face. Massive dark waves crashed against the jagged stone below, throwing freezing white foam high into the air. The sound of the ocean was deafening, drowning out every memory of Florida, every lie, every insult. The horizon stretched out forever, an endless expanse of deep blue. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the heavy, salty air. My chest was completely light. I finally understood the truth. True peace does not happen when toxic people finally apologize or understand your worth. Peace happens the exact second you stop needing them to. I did not need their permission to be great. I built my own fortress. I broke my own chains. I am the ghost. And I am immortal. If my story helped you break your own chains, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening to my journey. Stay strong, and I will see you next time.